There is brand new blockbuster reporting filled with new revelations on the Trump coup attempt, just ahead of the first in a series of public hearings by the January 6th Select Committee. Hearings that will, quote, blow the roof off the House, according to one member, Congressman Jamie Raskin. Washington Post out with an incredible scoop about the ex-president's call to, quote, walk down to the Capitol after his rally at the Ellipse on January 6th. From that Post report, quote, shortly before pro-Trump rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, Secret Service agents scrambled to try to secure a motorcade route so then President Trump could accompany his supporters as they marched on Congress to demand he stay in power. The hectic events that day followed nearly 2 weeks of persistent pressure from Trump on the Secret Service to devise a plan for him to join his supporters on a march to the Capitol from the park near the White House, where he was leading a massive rally that he predicted would be wild. It's not the only extraordinary piece of reporting today in the Post. There's this on the scheme to set up alternate slates of Trump electors, now under investigation by DOJ. It formed the linchpin of that strategy to disrupt the certification of the Electoral College results on January 6th. Quote, a staffer for Donald Trump's presidential campaign instructed Republicans planning to cast Electoral College votes for Trump in Georgia, despite Joe Biden's victory, to operate in complete secrecy. It's according to an email obtained by the Post. Quote, I must ask for your complete discretion in this process, wrote a man named Robert Sinners, the campaign's election operations director for Georgia, the day before the 16 Republicans gathered at the Georgia Capitol to sign certificates declaring themselves duly elected. Quote, your duties are imperative to ensure the end result, a win in Georgia for Trump, but will be hampered unless we have complete secrecy and discretion. A key question, as attorney and legal expert Norm Eisen tells the Post, quote, if there was nothing wrong with it, why go through such extraordinary lengths to hide what you're doing? The slates of Trump electors will reportedly be a focus of this month's hearings, which hope to lay out to the American people the full story and the full extent of the multi-pronged plot, conspiracy really, by Trump World and other allies from the work of their most senior Trump White House officials in peddling the big lie all the way to the brutal violence unleashed by extremist groups at the Capitol on January 6th. New York Times reports that Thursday's hearings will shed light on the role of the far-right pro-Trump extremist group, the Proud Boys, in the Capitol insurrection. Times reports this. The January 6th Select Committee intends to present live testimony from Nick Custed, a British documentarian who was filming the group with its permission during the riot, and from Caroline Edwards, a Capitol police officer who was injured, according to videotape of the incident, by a rioter who had been in a conversation moments earlier with one of the Proud Boys. Mr. Quested spent a good deal of the post-election period filming members of the Proud Boys, including Mr. Tarrio, and is considered by the committee likely to have been a witness to their conversations planning for January 6th. This footage, shot by Nick Custed, is being used as government evidence in that case against the Proud Boys. It was released at the request of NBC News. If you look closely, it shows the head of the Oath Keepers, that's Stuart Rhodes, meeting in a parking garage on the eve of the attack on the Capitol with the head of the other group, the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio. Both men have now been charged by the DOJ with seditious conspiracy in connection to the January 6th attack. Joining us now, New York Times congressional reporter Luke Broadwater and Jackie Alemany, Washington Post congressional investigations reporter, also an MSNBC contributor. Luke, it's not surprising that ahead of the public hearings, there's a crush of developments, new sort of visibility into both investigations, the Justice Department and the Congressional Committee. But let's start with the extremist groups. Talk about the Congressional Committee's interest in these groups and these actors, and how fruitful their efforts have been to tie those groups to Trump's circle.
Yes, so we learned yesterday through sources that the Proud Boys will be a focus of Thursday night's hearing from the January 6th committee. The two witnesses you announced, I think, will have very valuable information that maybe the public has not heard yet. Some of the video that this documentary filmmaker has shot has not been seen publicly before. And he is also reportedly aware of conversations that the Proud Boys were having, not just during the attack on the Capitol, but in the planning before the attack on the Capitol. And, you know, the committee is very interested in the fact that this was a coordinated attack and not just sort of a random a mob that got out of control. And then the officer, Caroline Edwards, anybody who's spoken with her knows that she has a very powerful story to tell. She was one of the first officers assaulted on January 6th and sustained a concussion. And even months later was still fainting, having fainting spells due to her injuries. And, I've interviewed her. She's a very tough person. And I think a lot of people will find her story inspiring because she will talk about how the Capitol Police have rallied in the months since that attack on the Capitol, which left them really devastated and overrun. And so the committee is going to be delving into these developments with these domestic violent extremists and showing that their inspiration and their interactions and their connections were to political actors and to Donald Trump himself, inspiring them and calling them to the Capitol on January 6th. And they're going to tie it all back into the plot to overturn the election that went on for months and weeks before January 6th.
Luke, I want to get to Jackie's reporting on the Secret Service in a second, but I just have to ask you, one of the first stories we had you on to ask you about was your reporting out of the associations and appearances and ties between sitting Republican members of Congress and these extremist groups. And I wonder if any of this testimony will reveal any such appearances, associations, or ties to any Republican members as well.
Well, I expect there to be at least one of the hearings, but perhaps throughout several of them, will be about connections between the domestic violent extremists and the political world. And in fact, you don't have to look that hard to find them. We've written articles about these very topics. Some of these people themselves occupy a foot in both spaces. Enrique Tarrio, the head of the Proud Boys, was also part of Latinos for Trump. And if you look at that meeting there in the garage, you have people who are affiliated with both the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and the Trump campaign, all intertwined there. So there are, you don't really have to do that much digging to see the connections. Now, I think the next step for the committee is establishing, basically, was there anything beyond connections? Was there sort of instructions or encouragement? And I think you do see a lot of encouragement towards extreme behavior that was going on that day.
Jackie, take us into this story and this sort of news cycle from the other side. What you and your colleagues are reporting is about premeditation, plans in December to participate in what would become the insurrection on January 6th. And just take us through what you're reporting about the Secret Service's role in that and what they've shared with the committee.
Yeah, Nicole. So my colleagues, Carol Leonnig, Josh Dawsey, Peter Herman, and I have reported today that Trump desired to go walk with his supporters to the Capitol from the Ellipse far earlier than has previously been reported, which suggests that he was well aware of the plans that were going to go down at the Capitol. He applied lots of pressure in various different ways on his U.S. Secret Service and those around him, making clear his desires to do so. He told our colleague Josh Dawsey in an interview even that was what he wanted to do, march to the Capitol, or that U.S. Secret Service wouldn't allow him to do it. But our reporting shows that the Secret Service actually did act in those very final moments, just an hour before protesters sieged the Capitol and actually breached security to try to fulfill Trump's wishes after he told pro-Trump supporters who had gathered to watch him speak at the Ellipse that he was going to march with them. If not for the D.C. police intervening and rebuffing those efforts, that might have actually happened. But they responded to Secret Service at the moment, saying that they weren't capable of being able to block intersections and clear the necessary areas in order for the president to safely make that march. On top of that, again, Trump had insisted from very early on that joining the march was something that he wanted to do. It hadn't been previously reported as well that Secret Service officials had considered actually taking steps to transport him there. Our story, more broadly speaking, also reflects a growing focus by the committee on whether or not the Trump White House did try to drag Secret Service into the president's quest to overturn the results of the election, and whether or not he succeeded more than anybody publicly realizes in actually doing so.
And Jackie, in terms of the committee getting to the bottom of that question you just posed, it seems from your reporting that the Secret Service is cooperating with the Select Committee's request, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Various Secret Service agents have appeared before the committee, and according to people who have been briefed on the testimony, and Secret Service told us in a statement on the record that they were cooperating with the committee's work as well.